Hi, everyone. I'm Sandra Farag, the head of youth services for the Kalamazoo Public Library, and I am thrilled to be here in discussion with two of Kidlit's all-time masters. It is my honor to introduce Kate DiCamillo and Sophie Blackall, who joined forces to create the stunning masterpiece that is the Beatryce Prophecy, which, by the way, just earned its first starred review from Booklist. And in case you've been living off the grid for the last few years, here's just some of the accolades these two powerhouses have garnered. Kate DiCamillo is a two-time Newbery Medalist. She was the winner for The Tale of Despereaux, as well as Flora and Ulysses, which is an adorable movie on Netflix if you haven't seen it, and a Newbery honor for Because of Winn-Dixie. The Tiger Rising was named a National Book Award finalist, and not only is she an award winner, but she was also the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature. Kate was born in Philadelphia and grew up in Florida and now lives in Minneapolis. Sophie Blackall is a two-time Caldecott medalist. She was the winner of Finding Winnie, the true story of the world's most famous bear, and Hello Lighthouse. She has also illustrated over 40 books. Sophie was born and raised in Australia and now calls Brooklyn her home. The Beatryce Prophecy is a medieval epic that somehow fits into a 250-page book. So that's, magic, if you were wondering. Sophie's black and white illustrations match the mood and the tone of the tale and are so stunning that they would not be out of place stitched on tapestry. The Beatryce Prophecy is a story that does not shy away from pain and sadness, but also gives the reader joy, friendship, laughter, and hope. There's a spunky heroine, her brave sidekick, mermaids, subtle magic, a wild-eyed monk, and a goat that is more than meets the eye. And without further ado, I want to welcome Kate and Sophie.
Hello.
Sandra, hi, thank you.
So excited about this. I'm like vibrating in my chair, but anyway. So I will start at the very beginning, and it's the very first line in the Beatryce Prophecy, which I love. It is written in the Chronicles of Sorrowing that one day there will come a child who will unseat a king. The prophecy states that the child will be a girl. Because of this, the prophecy has long been ignored. So what drew me initially is that this seemed like a feminist tale for middle grade readers. So was that your intent? And do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I'll start, Sophie, and then you can make me sound smarter than I am, because we all know what I'm going to say. I had no, I never really have intent other than telling a story. So it's just like after it was all done, I could see that there was this feminist, like, it was a subtle light motif, but I never was aware of that as I was working. Rather, I was just aware that I wanted to tell that I was following the goat and the girl is basically what it came down to. And it's always that way for me, in that I don't outline, so I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't think about themes in the beginning. And by the time I was done and we were talking with Candlewick about it, I thought, and Sophie, I don't know if you know this or not, I thought, we need Sophie. Because by then it was just like, well, wait a minute, I can see that there's this feminist, message throughout, unwittingly by me, and then we need Sophie. So it's like, it's female and female. So Sophie, what do you want to say about that? Were you aware of it as like feminist when you were reading
it? I was, I suppose so, but not in a I wasn't kind of labeling it in my mind in that way. I always welcome any book where there's a girl protagonist, and I love in books and in life and in any kind of encounter with another human being when they defy expectations. There are a few things as thrilling as somebody who turns out to be not quite what you imagined them to be, which is a general way of kind of going through life, I think, which is to always hope and expect that people are going to surprise you, and not take anything for granted. And Beatryce is so much more than we might expect when we first meet her. Um,
And in Swellica too, for that matter. We've got a female
and
too as
Swellica
well.
too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also Jack Dory, who is a boy who who can't read, because Beatrice can read, which is a very rare and exceptional thing in the time of this book, and Jack Dory can't, and that's another kind of astonishing thing that human beings can do, is to acknowledge the things they can't do and to accept help to be able to do them, which is very exciting.
You know what, Sandra? I think we should just direct all questions from this point on to Sophie, because you knocked that out of the
Oh
park.
no.
No.
Yeah.
No.
That's fabulous. Yeah. Okay. All right, Sandra. Next hard question.
Well, Sophie actually segued it quite lovely for question 2, which is that the book does focus on the importance and privilege of reading. So how important was that to have that message throughout your book?
And again, I had no idea. And actually, this even is like, I could see the feminist stuff by the time I was done, but it wasn't until I sat down to write a speech about exactly where this story came from. I knew that I wanted to dedicate it to my mom, and I knew that in an emotional way, but I didn't unpack all that emotion until I sat down to write a speech about where the story came from. And in doing that, I remembered something that I'd never forgotten, but it was like something that was not at all front and center for me when I was working on this, which was how desperately I wanted to read when I was in. We didn't learn to read in kindergarten; we learned to read in first grade. I struggled, and we were taught with phonics then. And for whatever reason, it made no sense to me. And I just knew that I needed what was in books. And I came home wailing to my mother, who was a very no nonsense person, and said something along the lines of like, well, for the love of Pete, calm down. You're smart. We'll just memorize the words. And she made me these flashcards of just words. And every day after school we worked and I memorized them, and it was the way in for me. And my mom saw that, how desperately I needed it, saw a way to work with the way my mind was working. And so she gave me that thing, and it was like this door that opened onto this room filled with light. And so that all was like percolating below my conscious mind when I was writing the story, that the power of being able to do that, and that my mother facilitated it, but it was never in the forefront of my brain. So.
Wow.
I love that story so much. Your mother sounds remarkable, and the flashcards and the patience, and it's just such a good story.
She was an amazing, she would call me a piece of work. I would call her a piece of work. Piece of work together. She gave me what I needed, and she always saw me as a reader. And boy, that really mattered, because that's ultimately who I am first and foremost. Do you think of yourself, Sophie, as
a reader? Yes.
Yeah, I know you think of yourself as a reader, and Sandra, of course, we don't need to ask you that question. That's the first way I identify in the world before everything else, and that got solidified in my mind by my mother and that early experience, because she saw how much I needed it. I knew that I needed what was in books. So, okay, anyway, sorry.
I don't actually remember learning to read, which is so interesting. I had an older brother who could read, and I was just desperate to do anything he could do. So I think that was probably the thing that drove me. But I quickly realized in our household, we had a single mother who, and we lived in the country, and there was not a whole lot of money, and everything came from thrift shops, but we had books, and the books came from thrift shops mostly as well, but we had a lot of them. And we all had to pull our weight and do a lot of chores. But my brother and I quickly realized that if we were reading, my mother was less likely to make us wash the floor or weed the vegetable garden. So we just read constantly. And especially if you could read up a tree, so you'd be slightly more removed. And we figured that out pretty quickly. So reading was just a huge part of my childhood, which I recognize as a privilege. You know, I took it totally for granted at the time. But
that
Yeah,
story
and
about your
it is a privilege. Okay, Sandra, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that story about your mom. Like, she seems like a fascinating woman because she did some out of the box thinking to like meet you where you were, as opposed to
Exactly.
trying to force well, this is the curriculum, this is how you're supposed to learn it, and came up with the no, this is how Kate needs to learn it. Let's do this together. So that is brilliant. And Sophie, I also don't remember learning how to read, but I do remember thinking it was important enough that my sister is 3 years younger than me. So when I would come home, I would teach her how to read when she was like in kindergarten, which I guess paid off because she ended up going to Harvard undergrad and NYU law. So I'm like, you know, that's because of me.
exactly. Take total credit for that.
All the credit, all of it.
Sandra, it all goes to that thing of like, of the power of it, right? It's just like once, and I just remember that feeling. It's just like, it is literally, you're empowered. And it's like nobody can, and that's the way I remember feeling, is like that everybody can get out of my way now, because it's just like I can put my hands on anything that I need through books. And so, yeah.
So in the publishing world, many people may not know this, but for many authors and illustrators, there is no communication between them. It's a very separate process. So I am curious to know, did you both work together? And if so, what was your process?
I'll start, Sophie, and then you can, as usual, make me sound even better than I am. So you're right, Sandra, people just do not know that. I mean, most people think when you do a book together that you're literally side by side in a room. I mean, that's what people think. And I'm always kind of amazed when well, back in the old days when you were out in front of a group of people, it's just like most people think that. And not only do we not work side by side, but the standard issue way that it goes is that you really don't, you're not communicating with the person who is illustrating the book at all. And part of that, I think, is because they think that writers are kind of crazy and artists are kind of crazy, and it's not going to benefit anybody if we're talking, right? You know, and so it's more editorial and the design teams that are working and talking to the various parts of us. So Sophie and I had each other's email address from, you know, because we've been out and about and seen each other here and there, and I've long been a fan. So we did things a little bit differently, that like occasionally I would email when something came in that just blew my socks off. I had to say something, and all of it, of course, goes without saying, blew my socks off. But the other thing that Sophie and I did that's kind of like, something that we really weren't supposed to be doing, I guess, is Sophie, can I show this again? So Sophie sent me this, I think that there's going to be slides where Sophie talks about this, but and where it came from. But this is like a little, it's incredible, a mussel shell that holds an illuminated manuscript that Sophie made as she was working on this. And it is never far from my site. And you'll be able to see this better when Sophie shows her art. But it became this thing where it was like, this to me feels like kind of like holding a secret. And for both of us, I mean, for me, as I was writing the book, it was kind of like trying to write a dream. It was something that I kind of felt like I was trying to remember. And then Sophie, when we would communicate, sometimes articulated the same feeling for her, where it was just like the art would show up and it was like something that she was, so it was very powerful and unique kind of collaboration. And I just feel that alone was a huge gift of this, because a lot of it came in during the pandemic. And so the light and the luminous quality of what she's done was really like necessary for my soul in a way. So Sophie.
See, I can just echo everything that you said, because it's all true and was very much my experience as well. And I think the first email I sent to Kate was just, thank you for this gift, because that's really what it felt like. It would have been an extraordinary gift at any time, but during the early days and weeks and months of lockdown, when everything was so uncertain, to transport myself into this world of Beatryce and Jack Dory and Cannock and the Edict's world and Answellica's, to be with them in the forest and on their mission to get to the castle, it just felt like I was working towards something, even as I was stagnant, because that was the thing in the early days where it was just every day was the same. Every day was at home. You'd maybe have one little trip to the shops, but it was all fraught, but the rest every day was, and we had no end in sight. But in this book, we were traveling and things were changing, and it was so wonderful. Not to mention the gifts of the visual imagery and the stories within stories. And I think we might talk about that a little bit later. But and so I did send some rapturous emails to Kate during it, which always felt a little bit naughty, like passing notes in school.
Right, it did feel like passing notes. Is just
we'll talk about a little bit about the book, but that was when I should not have been doing any extracurricular drawing. I really should have been, head down, getting pages done. I've totally forgotten the question. I've gone off on my.
It was just about the process of the two of you working together.
Oh yes, well, it was joyful. It was very good fun, and I didn't want it to end, which is why I dragged my heels at the end. Can I do some more embellishments? How about this? Could I do this page over? It's really not quite right. Just anything to stretch it out.
Right now,
it's beautiful right now. So I think you both did a really great job. So I would love to talk a little bit about Answellica, because how much fun did you have creating such an intriguing character?
Oh, Answellica was just like, gosh, so much fun, because it goes back to that thing that Sophie said about it's such a huge delight for us as human beings and as readers is when people and goats are not who you expect them to be. And so again, back to this thing of like not knowing where I'm going when I'm writing, I start off with the goat was just like, she was a demon goat. And so I didn't know what was going to happen in the very beginning when we find Beatryce curled up next to her. And it's just like, oh no, I'm as terrified as Brother Edic is. So it's just like, she constantly surprised me. And then it became this thing where it went from surprise to rather me taking a huge comfort in just the mere presence of this goat. It was one of those things, because as I'm making my way through the story and I don't know what's going to happen, the goat is one of the animals that I just like, I leaned on her to lead me through the story and to keep us all safe. So, and Sophie grew up with a goat. Josephine, who it was so funny because again, in our passing notes back and forth in class, it took you a while to even remember that. It's odd. Yeah.
It did. And, but it was very much that feeling of having someone by your side. She was a Nubian goat with the long floppy ears, much like Answellica. And she was called Josephine after a book that I loved at the time. I think I was about 9 or 10 when I had Josephine. And I was reading this book, Hugo and Josephine, which is a Swedish book from the 50s, I think. It's fantastic. So Josephine became Josephine. But can I tell you a little bit about when I first read this book? Because I've told this story a few times now, but it was so, I think it's a good one. I was about to leave the house to go to work to my studio, and I had my coat on, I had my bag on. I was literally about to step out the door, and I checked my phone one last time before the whole 20-minute walk where I wouldn't check my phone. And there was an email with a manuscript, and it was Beatryce, and it was, might you be interested in doing the drawings for this? And it was just, oh, this morning has suddenly taken a turn. I started reading it standing up, and then I slipped my bag off, and then I took my coat off, and then I actually sat down on the couch where I never ever sit down, and read the entire book from beginning to end, and I had goosebumps, and I'm fairly sure I was weeping a little bit by the end. And I mean, I didn't have to read it to know that I was going to do the drawings, but the opening few paragraphs which describe Anne Swelliker, there's a sentence in there that I just loved immediately. That was, I have it somewhere, here it is. She was a goat who formed peculiar and inexplicable antipathies, taking an intense dislike to certain individuals. And I thought that I am in, not to mention the description of her teeth, but I loved a goat who would take antipathies, and even that the word antipathies is in the, on the second page of a book for kids, that even if they don't know this word, the next sentence tells them what this word is, and they know, as I did from this beginning to read this book, that they are not only in very, very good hands with Kate, but they are on a ride, and they are about to go on a journey. And I knew that I was not going to work. I was on this journey. But Anne Swelliker is an extraordinary character, and she is the goat that she refuses to be separated from Beatryce, which is what I think every child and many of us still today would like, to have an animal who refuses to be separated from us, who gets sleep in your room. And I would like to have a goat. I would.
Sandra, do you want a goat?
I don't know if I want a goat.
Oh.
I don't know. My daughter at one point had a pet pig that she adored.
Oh,
So maybe a pig
yeah.
and a goat.
Okay.
I don't know. We would have a menagerie if I could do it.
Yeah.
It's very hard to do in New York City, but I might be able to pull it off in Michigan.
When you say had a pig, I do have to know what happened to
Oh, yeah, it was one of those like my mini pigs, but the landlord, they were renting. So the landlord found out and was like, no, you cannot have a pig here in your house. And then she's like, but they're even cleaner than like cats and dogs, and they don't do nearly all the things. But they just said no. So it went to another family who had pigs as pets and other animals.
So the pig is safe.
The pig is safe. Yes, the pig is named Chunk. He comes up in conversation a lot. Yeah, we did not eat him. Nothing to that effect. He's living a happy life.
Oh,
For Sophie, how did you pick and choose what parts to illustrate? And would you mind showing us some images possibly?
Oh, yes, I would love to. I think with every book, my first thought is, what is the kid going to want to see, and what would I have wanted to see as a kid reading this book? And then that's followed fairly quickly by, what do I want to draw? Because I'm selfish and self-interested, and so sometimes there's the kids probably want to see this traffic jam in a particular book, and I have no interest in drawing cars, so I'm just not going to show it to them. But no, that's not. I try to show them what I think they want to see, but in this book it was more kind of, how can I not draw all these things, because it was a catalogue of gorgeous images, a list of moons and stars and bees and mermaids and seahorses and flowers with names I had never heard of. I'm a little botanically ignorant, but I would go and look them up and find that they don't exist at all, except in Kate's imagination. And now I have the extraordinary honor of drawing these imaginary flowers like elder hist. So yeah, it was what how can I whittle down all the possibles pictures to put in this book. But Stephanie, if we could launch into, I could show just a few of them. So this was the very first picture that I made. This is a portrait of Beatryce, and I felt like I needed to sort of pin her down before I did anything else. And this is actually the first drawing. I thought if I tried to redraw it, I'd lose her. So we just kept her. And to find her, I looked at pictures of Joan of Arc because I felt that there was some crossover with her determination and her disguising herself as a young monk. So the next picture is a portrait of Joan of Arc from 1902 by Albert Lynch. And this struck me as having something of the quality of the Beatryce I imagined. So I did borrow a little bit from her, face structure and her determined eyebrows. What do we have next? What's the next picture? Oh, then, so once I had Beatryce locked in, I started delving into illuminated manuscripts. And this was right before lockdown in New York. And I got to, one of the last things I did in the pre-COVID world was to go to the Morgan Library and to spend time just drooling over some of the book's hours and things that they have in that incredible collection. And when I was looking for illuminated letters, because Brother Edic does a beautiful bee, it seemed that all the letters that I was finding were bees. When you're looking for something, it seems to pop up more often. So the next thing I did was the bee in the next slide. And that was just pure pleasure, making these entwining vines of the bee, which I did with some gold, some gilt, and that is on the case cover of the special edition of the book. So there were so many really fun production things that we got to do with Candlewick, with their extraordinary packaging and things. What do we have next? Oh, this was more just delving into early books and illuminated texts and finding all these just delicious ornamentation. And the next one, especially lingering on any pictures I could find of people reading and things, monks and satchels and all the things that were details in the story that I was going to get to draw. And then we have the next thing, obviously, was to pin down Answelica. This was the first little sketch I did of the goat with her teeth. I did quite like her her toothy grin, and I was looking at a picture of a goat who had a distinct heart shape in the way that her fur grew on her forehead. But as I read the text more closely, which is always a good idea for an illustrator, something I sometimes do after I've done the drawings. Oh, wait, let me go back and actually read what Kate wrote, which was that her head is, Answelica's head is so firm and kind of bony, and she butts, everybody with this head. Except for Beatryce, but clearly there are no horns involved. So then the next picture was, the next picture is actually me fondling a goat, which I will do it at any opportunity, because I do look at that head. And then the next one was my friend Donna Ann McAdam, who breeds Nubian goats, and I enlisted her help without being able to tell her what for, to send me goat pictures, which she still does, sometimes daily, and I welcome them all because they are hilarious, these creatures. And then the next slide is the sketch of Answelica where she sort of came to life. Still those bucky teeth. Some people are goat averse because of their rectangular pupils in their eyes, but I just think they're fantastic. They're so smart and funny. And then what do we have? So this was the picture that I sent in to Chris Paul, our fantastic creative director, right when I suspected Chris was wringing her hands in with sort of anxiety of whether I was going to deliver anything of substance, because when I'm beginning a book, a lot of it is happening in my head, and I'm reading and researching, and it takes me a while for those wheels to spin to actually kind of take off. And I feel like with every project with a new team I haven't worked with before, there's this moment where they're kind of just thinking, can we get out of this contract? What on earth have we done? And then I will deliver something, and hopefully, usually there's a collective sigh of relief. It's like, oh, all right. So this was the picture, and I love this moment because it's early on when Brother Edic finds Beatryce. He just approaches Answelica with his usual wariness, because she's likely to bite him or butt him. But he sees this goat with two heads, and it is not, of course, two heads. It is Beatryce, who is lying asleep and clearly has traveled far and has blood on her legs, and she is holding Answelica's ear. And there's something so moving about this moment, and Beatryce, we come to know, is so fierce and determined and courageous, and has all of these unexpected skills and characteristics, but in this moment she's a child, and she's incredibly vulnerable, and it's a lovely start to the book. Then we just have a couple more. This is just a sketch in process, which I don't usually show people, because they're, I sort of see, it's so ugly and messy, and it's this part of the process which is sort of feels a little bit like directing your characters. You know who they are at this point, and you just have to get them to stand in the right way. It's like, no, could you just move your head a little bit over there, and it's not quite right, and look as though you mean it. And so this was just trying to figure out how best to show this moment of reunion between Beatryce and her mother, which is another kind of part of the book that just stopped me in my tracks. And I had them in different colors when I was drawing them, just so I could kind of so I could keep them apart and know how they were responding to each other. Again, Kate reminded me of the word palimpsest, which I love. I forget that word every few years and then come back to it, but it's the laying. I think it generally refers to text, right, to manuscripts, but it's the writing over the top and erasing, and that's the traces of things that are underneath, which is sort of like all, I think of as all storytelling in a way, because we're telling these layers of stories over the top of all the stories that have come before, and Beatryce definitely feels like that to me. Next one. See, I talked so long, it went through twice. And here's just our Elder Hist, and we talked about Elder Hist already, which was my not knowing what it was and then getting to draw it. And then I think we just have a couple of pictures of the illicit mussel shell manuscript that I sent to Kate. I had been in Australia, and it was right in the middle of the bushfires, and I was walking on a beloved beach where everything had been burnt right down to the shoreline, and I found this open empty mussel shell at the edge of where the tide had gone out, and picked it up and put it in my pocket and carried it with me for a little while, and then it felt just like it should be a book. And because Beatryce has these stories within stories and a book within the book, it felt like I just had to drop what I was doing and make this little book and send it off to Kate, which she was generous enough to accept.
Like I said, it's never far from me, and Sophie, that's the second time I've seen that, and I love it each time, and I find something new each time. And I meant to tell you the first time I saw it that Joan of Arc this goes to Sandra, to the question about the feminist thing, which I carried on my phone. I had a picture of Joan of Arc that I'd taken at the National Portrait Gallery. It's like, oh, there's Beatryce. And so I carried that the whole time I was working as my screensaver on my phone. Never thought about anything to do with feminism or anything like that. But I love it, Sophie, that you went to Joan of Arc with.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
Okay, sorry. So that was fabulous, Sophie. Thank you.
That mussel shell book.
Do you believe it?
It's unlike anything I've ever seen before. And I
Right.
sort of want to go steal it from you. I won't, but I want to.
You can just hold it in your hand. It's super comforting. It's almost like a goat ear.
Yeah. Yes.
Mm.
Oh my goodness. Sophie, you don't cease to amaze anyone.
Oh.
No, I know.
Well,
My
talking
family,
about
they're sick of it. They're totally.
talking about lines that stop in the tracks. So for Kate, I do a lot of reading, so much reading. And for me, like a lot of books just run together. But then there are times where a single line can stop me in my tracks, right? So there's a line in the Beatryce Prophecy, which is, nothing is more terrifying to evil than joy. So that resonated with me on a personal level. And I don't know if it's maybe because of what we've had to endure for the last few years. But when you're writing, do you know that certain lines you've written will make such a powerful impact for the reader?
No. And I've always said this, and I say this all the time, and I mean it every time I say it. The story is smarter than I am. And so there are things that you had sent your notes ahead of time, Sandra, with that, and I saw that and I thought, oh, that's really powerful, but it doesn't have anything. I feel like I didn't come up with it. It's like the story is better than I am, and I learn from writing the story, and it makes me a better person to get to write the story. But I don't, I don't know what I'm doing. That's basically what it comes down to.
I think you do.
I
It just comes out in a different way. And we touched on this a little bit earlier, but this is a story within a story. And some people find it hard to create just one story, let alone like simultaneous stories within one book. So how do you manage to keep everything straight, and how much more difficult is it to bring multiple storylines together?
I probably love it all the way back from, when I was really young, that feeling of a story inside a story inside a story. It has the feeling of, nesting dolls, and it's just like, it's what every story feels like to me. So to be able to because everything is connected. So oddly, I mean, I had every story that I write is really hard for me to write, but oddly, I did not have to make sometimes I'll have to make exterior, like a flow chart, or I'll have to make, like with Despero, I had to make a gigantic timeline because I didn't understand where I was. I didn't have to do any of that with this. It was just like all those stories that were hidden inside this story were also, all of them were accessible to me, and I didn't have to, it was like going deeper and deeper into underwater, and I just felt able to breathe and to look around, and it wasn't hard to keep it straight in my head at all. It just was deeply satisfying every time I found another story. And for both of you, because Sandra, you know this book now as well as Sophie and I, because of prepping for this, but it's just, there was a time when I wanted a story within a story within a story. I wanted the seahorses to tell a story that then would be, and I just wanted to keep on going like that. Not only did I not have a hard time, it's just like, I just wanted to keep on finding another story with each character. So it was really satisfying to do it.
Yeah, and you pulled it together brilliantly. Like there's no clunky parts, like everything just flows as it should. So it's really remarkable.
Wow.
would you mind doing a reading of the book?
Yeah, and when we were preparing for this, and I said this to you before we started, you had asked for me to read from one of my favorite parts, which is nice because you don't always get to do that when you're reading. I'm going to read chapter 34, which is, as Sophie said, this is in a world where most people cannot read. And it's against the law for anybody female to read, but most people can't read at all. And Jack Dory can't read. And Beatrice is appalled by that. And she decides that she's going to teach him. Each letter has a shape, Beatrice said, and each letter has a sound. And you put these shapes and sounds together and they become words. Do you understand? Aye, he said to her. His heart was beating fast. He did not know, he had not understood how much he wanted it to know the secret of letters and sounds and words. But his heart, pounding against his ribcage, was telling him. He and Beatrice were bent together over a piece of parchment, and Swalika was leaning over them, staring down at the parchment too. She gave off a tremendous smell of goat. You, said Jack Dory, are in my way. He gave Answellica a small shove. She butted her forehead against his, shoving him back. Candlewick was gone. Where he had gone, they did not know. He was off on whatever mysterious errand a man who had once been king and was king no more might need to attend to. It begins with this, said Beatrice. This is the letter A, and it is the first one. She formed the letter. A, he repeated. He smiled. There are 26 letters in all, she said. You will learn each of them, and once you know them, you can mix them as you will, and then use them to form the words of the world and the things of the world. You can write of everything, what is, and what was, and what might yet be. Jack Dory nodded. The inside of Candlewick's tree was snug. There was a smell of beeswax burning, and also, of course, the smell of goat. The bee buzzed around Jack Dory's head. Granny Bibspeak beside him, saying, learn it, my beloved, learn it all, light of my heart, river of my soul. A is for Abelard, that is my family name. A is also the letter that begins the name Answellica. The goat let out an approving grunt. The next of the 26 is B. She bent her head and formed the letter. B is the first letter of my name, Beatrice, and from there to C. What word begins with C? Asked Jack Dory. Candlewick, said Beatrice. And when will we get to the Jack Dory letters? Soon, said Beatrice. He watched the letters appear one by one beneath her hand, and he felt as if each letter were a door pushed open inside of him, a door that led to a lighted room. The world, said Beatrice to Jack Dory, can be spelled. So,
I was literally on the edge of my seat, leaning in. It's like, can I get any closer to this?
but it's like that feeling of something unlocking inside of you, So Sandra, thanks for letting me read that, and Sophie, thanks for listening.
Oh my gosh, I'm all chilly. My heart grew 3 sizes. Because you break it down, like, again, the theme of reading and how powerful it is and how you don't feel complete without knowing how to do it. And Jack Dory is a character who does well at many things and has talents and abilities. But for the task of reading, he feels such a fundamental loss. And for her to explain it simply and to show him what his future could be once he learns this, how much more he could become, it's just remarkable. So for Kate and Sophie, we shall all in the end be led to where we belong. We shall all in the end find our way home. And that message comes through a couple times throughout the book. And that was another phrase that had made an impact on me. But that quote seems to suggest a type of journey. So what was your journey in creating the Beatryce Prophecy?
It was, for me, this huge journey of discovery, because I had started on this, Sandra, a long time ago, and then literally forgotten about this story and found it when I was cleaning a closet. So it sat for a long, long time. So it was this journey of discovery. And it was also a journey for me of empowerment, which I use cautiously, but because what I ultimately got from this was the comfort and power of the story, but also that way to see my mother even more clearly, for who she was and what she gave to me. And that this story gave me that. And that was a huge gift for me. So it was a journey of discovery and empowerment for me. How's that? Does that sound okay?
I'm writing that down.
Okay, Sophie, what was it for you?
I think it was the idea of, we shall all in the end be led to where we belong is such a lovely, comforting idea. And I think this year, especially, this idea of where do we belong, and for so many people, and we were talking to Sawako before, who has gone home to Japan to be with her family. It's where do we most want to be in this time, and even more importantly, with whom do we want to share these important journeys and the most important time, which is now. Now is the most important time, because we don't know what we have ahead of us, and so that for me was part of that, and which is also about again, it's always about books, but it's about the stories that we read, and where are we in our real world, but where are we in our reading world as well, and where are we going to go, and that is infinite and limitless, and we just have to open the door of a book, and off we go. And I think for so many people too, during the pandemic, reading was a lifeline, and having access to books, and thank goodness for the libraries who stayed open, and for the mobile libraries, and for the digital libraries. But yeah, that was my journey.
That's the end of my questions, but I thought it might be fun if you two wanted to ask each other a couple of questions.
I'm glad for that chance, because I wanted to say that Joan of Arc thing, which I got to say, but also when Sophie was just really doing, answering the question that you asked, as opposed to me, who was just kind of wandering off in the mist in the woods, and not addressing that quote directly, about, this thing about being led to where we belong. Like you said, Sophie, it's comforting, but it's also, it goes with that thing about we need to be open to going on that journey. And we also, and being led means that you're following somebody, and I think that's that thing about finding your people in the world, or your goats, and those, because this is so much a story about being seen, people loving you for who you are, and once you find those people who see you for who you are, then you can go with them to where you belong. And sometimes it takes a while to find those people, but those people are also always waiting for you in books. And that's so much of what you said, Sophie, when you answered the question is touches on all of those things. It's just like, it's the comfort of finding the people that you belong with, and sometimes until you find them in person, you can't find them in books. And it's such a great honor to get to do this work, and to make friends with people through story. So that's my, yeah.
See, you're really good at this answering questions thing. Okay, I have a question for you. which is, who are some of your friends in books? Who are some of the people you return to in books?
I return to certain authors quite a bit. Eudora Welty, Isaac Denison, Flannery O'Connor, E.B. White is right up there. But you know what I'm reading right now, Sophie, and it's odd, I keep on thinking about you when I'm doing this, so I've been wanting to ask you this. I'm rereading from my childhood all of my, did you read The Borrowers when you were a kid?
Oh, I read a couple of them. I was not, friends of mine I remember in primary school would just raved about them. But I did, but I should return. I have.
Yes, because I'm staring at you with my mouth open. It's like, yeah, you need to return.
There's judgment here. It's judgment.
Right. So, and do you reread certain people, Sophie, or?
Oh, yeah. I mean, not constantly. I do try to read some contemporary books, but the draw to return to old ones is very strong, because while they are there waiting for us, but we're different every time we come back to them, and that is what's so fascinating. And of course, sometimes we reread books and find things that we didn't notice, that we were oblivious to when we were younger, and the world has changed, and mostly for the better, and those are all good things. And so sometimes returning to a book makes you feel differently about that book, but then other times it's just pure joy. And I love now I'm completely blank. You'll have to help me. 5 Children in It, The Railway Children.
The Boxcar Children?
No, the English.
Nesbit?
Yes, E. Nesbit. Love her. She's just so funny and acerbic, and she's just the character of It in 5 Children in It is just brilliant. And yeah, just sort of obscure books from my childhood, like rediscovering Hugo and Josephine, which kind of came with this like visceral, I remember these line drawings. And The Wind in the Willows is one I return to every spring. I read the opening of The Wind in the Willows, because I'm not sure that there's a better description of a river in all of literature. But yes, no, there are a lot.
That's fabulous. And it's just like when you're saying that visceral reaction, this is the last thing I'll say. It's like, I used to work in a used bookstore, and people would come in sometimes looking for a book that they'd had when they were a kid. And there's nothing like being able to find that book that somebody remembers from when they were a kid and putting it in their hands. It is like you can see a physical reaction. So that it's just like it knocks people off their feet. It's so powerful. So lucky us to be engaged in this work, this powerful work of writing stories and for kids. It's just like and thank you to everybody that reads them, and Sandra, thank you for all that reading you do and all those books that you put in kids' hands. Okay, I'm done now.
And I think the last thing I will say, which is jumping on that, is, and I've said it since I closed that. Well, I didn't close the physical book, because I was reading it on a screen, the original manuscript, but that I read through in one sitting, and I got to the end of it, and my first thought was, I can't wait for people to read this book. I just feel like I am so lucky that I got to read it, and now other people are going to get to read this. And now that it is very nearly a book out in the world, I'm so excited for people to read it, because I just think they will be reading this long after we're gone, Kate. I think people will be reading this book and getting to know these characters who I feel, without any embarrassment or shame, are quite real to me. They are quite they exist. Beatrice, Nance Welliker, and Eddick and Cannick and Jack Dory, they're all right there, and it's just so lovely to know that they will be there for other people too.
Sophie, I had a similar reaction when I finished, because I too read this in one sitting, and librarians love to talk about what they've read. and like they want other people to read them too, so then we can discuss. And I'm like, I'm the only one that has read this. I can't talk about this with anybody. I have to share my book. Do I want to share my book? I'm going to share my book. But I go through this whole like internal dialogue because I really need to talk about it with people. And to talk about it with the two of you, oh my gosh. It's just such an amazing experience. So thank you for talking with me today.
Sandra, thank you. And
Thank you.
Sophie, I could listen to you talk all day. And
Likewise.
I want to tell both of you that I got a tree, a little red bud tree, and I'm going to plant it in the front yard, and I've named it Answelica. So,
Oh,
yeah. So that seems like a fitting end to this conversation, huh? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
bye. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.